Hi, I think I'm live. So my sourdough starter is growing really well. If you remember, it was just a couple hours earlier when I showed you how much it had grown to. It was like maybe twice the size. Now it's like more than doubled, and it's still going upwards. So it's still going upwards. So that's when you know it's ready. So for example, if it starts to come back down, then you want to use a really active sourdough starter. So if it's still climbing up, it's active, and it's more. If it's more than doubled, then you know it's plenty active. So I'm gonna cook with it just because I've only fed it twice, but I don't know. I'm impatient and I want bread, so I'm gonna get started. So the recipe I use is from Pantry Mama, and it says to start with the starter and 50 grams of it. So some of you don't have scales at home, so I'm gonna put the starter in a little cup just to see how much 50 grams ends up being. It's gonna be tough for you to tell because your starter will be a different amount of bubbly, and the more bubbly it is, it's the volume will be different for the weight. But another way to tell if your starter is ready is you take a small amount of it and you put it in a big bowl of water. If it floats, then it's said to have passed the float test, and that's how you know it's ready. I know mine's ready because I've done this enough times that I can just kind of tell, and also when I lift the bottle, it feels really light for how much it looks like in here. So I know it would pass the float test. I know mine's ready. So I will see how much 50 grams comes to roughly, just so that you hopefully have an idea. When it's this bubbly, when you stir it down, the bubbles, see, already starting to deflate. And so see how it has come down, so the top of the thing is here, and you can see that the volume is down. So if you keep stirring it, it'll deflate a little. So that's what happens when you go to use it. So I'm going to turn on my scale and zero it with the cup on the thing. Wish I could show here. See if I can prop this up so you guys can see what's going on. This may or may not work. So I'm gonna put the scale on this little surface. Put it here. All right. Well, sort of. So here we go. Measuring 50 grams. And I use this little thing. It's a spatty. I've seen it on Shark Tank, from a long time ago. All right, so measuring, let's see. You don't have to be exact. The 50 grams is like, if you go 51 or 49 or 52 or even 60, don't worry about it. I would err on the side of, oops, 62. I would err on the side of a little bit more than a little less, because this recipe calls for 50-gram starter, which is 10% by Baker's Math, and you can use anywhere from 10 to 20% by Baker's Math. So if you end up anywhere between 50 and 100, you're actually fine. Like, you did 80 grams, you're fine. So on this little cup thing, it shows, it comes up to maybe about a quarter cup, a little less, because on this side it's not all the way up there. So that's how much starter is going to go in. And the first step is to mix the starter with the water, and it calls for 350 grams water. So I'm going to put another empty measuring cup, and I'm going to tare it again to 0. And water, use room temp water. I put water in an old juice jug. If your water is chlorinated in your area, then let it sit out so the chlorine dissipates, or use filtered water. But make sure it's, if you get filtered water from your fridge and it's chilled, you don't want chilled water because the cold will slow the yeast down from growing. So you want to use room temp water. And I'm going to measure 350 grams? Yeah, 350 grams of water. So let's see what that comes to. Mm. 48. Close enough? I think 350 grams is going to be about a cup and a half, because I'm at 348 grams and it's just under a cup and a half. So you're gonna put that in a bowl. Get all this out of my way. So you want to get yourself a nice big bowl, like a bowl that has room for the dough to grow, because it's gonna grow really big. So I'm trying to do this so you guys can see what's going on too, which is kind of tricky. Maybe I'll prop it back up on this. All right, so you get that starter in there. And remember that 50 grams, if you go a little over, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I got 62 in here and it's fine. You probably, you know, in colder weather, you want to use more than 10% baker's math. I think something like if it's really hot, then use only 10%. If it's really cold, then use like 20%, or somewhere in between. Okay, then you take your water. I'm gonna pour that in. And you just want to stir it to dissolve the starter with the water. So stir, stir a bunch. Get that big old blob to... Oh, I should mention about the float test. Grab it when it's bubbling, not when you stir it so that it deflates. I made that mistake too, because I was reading about all these tips about sourdough starter and I didn't understand, so I went and stirred my starter and then tried to pass the float test and it never did. I was like, oh, my starter's never going to be ready. And then I realized, oh, no, you just grab a little off the top when it's fed and bubbly, and when it has all the bubbles in it, that's how you can tell. So yeah, I can share my sourdough baking journey with you. It took me a long time to figure it out. I read a lot of articles, I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and finally my first loaf that was not a brick, I celebrated. It was awesome. Okay, so starter dissolved with the water, and now you want to add the flour and the salt. So can you believe that sourdough bread is just flour, water, salt? I mean, the starter itself is just flour and water. Okay, so this calls for 500 grams bread flour and 10 grams salt. So what I'll tell you about the salt is make sure you're using like sea salt or like kosher salt, or just something that's not iodized, because I think the iodized salt stunts the growth of the starter from bubbling. So yes, definitely iodized, not non-iodized salt of some sort. Okay, so I'm going to switch from the tiny spatula now to the bigger spatula to stir this. So I'm going to set aside my tiny spatula, and I'm going to measure, yeah, so this one I'm not going to put the bread, it's going to be a lot of bread flour. I'm not going to put the bread flour in a measuring cup. You're going to have to do the Googling, the conversion for how many cups is roughly 500 grams of bread flour. So I'm going to tare the scale with the bowl on top and switch it to grams, and I'm just going to plop a bunch of bread flour. So I have my little scoop. Okay, it's going to be a lot of scoops. 500 grams of flour is quite a bit, so just keep scooping it in there until you reach either 500 on your scale, if you happen to have a kitchen scale, or just Google how many cups of flour. And it may matter the difference between bread flour and an all-purpose flour, so like be specific, bread flour, because I don't know the density of each flour, like how much does it differ? Does all-purpose flour much less dense than bread flour, like by a lot, by a little, negligible amount when measuring? I have no idea. I will say I tried to make sourdough bread before I owned a kitchen scale, and my results were not great. A scale does help. It helps a lot. I think, you know, real bakers, oops, that's 521 grams. So I'm just going to scoop a little off the top because I haven't mixed it in yet with the rest of it. Oh, now it's only 496. Okay, add some back in. Oh, 501. That's close enough. So that's the bread flour. And when you add the salt, I highly recommend you add the salt before you start mixing the water with the flour because you want the water to like dissolve some of the salt. So I ground up some of the salt and we want 10 grams. So hopefully this is enough for 10 grams. Yes! Oh my gosh, that was exactly 9 grams. I'm 1 gram short. So then I have to take my coarse, you can buy like fine ground sea salt. I just happen to have coarse. So what I've been doing is I've been mixing it in my, I've been grinding it down in my little mortar and pestle. All right, so 1 gram's worth I'm gonna quickly grind up just to make sure I have enough salt. So I will tell you a funny little story about me and salt with the sourdough recipes. So some recipes have you mixing this thing called the levain or leaven or levain, I don't know how it's pronounced, first before you add the salt. And so I always forgot the salt because I would do all the other parts and then, okay, here we go. Hopefully this is 1 gram. No, not enough yet. Yeah, yes, it's okay. So we are at 10 grams salt. So I didn't know, I was having a hard time keeping track of which recipe I was following and whether I added the salt or not, and so I forgot salt in a bunch of the recipes. Okay, so now you mix up. So you have your water, your starter, your flour, and your salt. I was making some loaves of bread without any salt in them, and you can tell right away that first taste. You're just like, yeah, it's missing something. That 10 grams of salt makes a huge difference. I forgot salt so many times in the sourdough recipe that it's become a joke in my household. Like, did you forget the salt again? And every time I'm making a sourdough loaf, my husband's like, did you remember the salt? And I'm like, yes, I remembered it this time, I swear. But yeah, my first few loaves, really bland. So we would just like put some butter on it and then pour some table salt right on top. All right, so you just want to mix it up real good, get that to incorporate, and just keep mixing the flour to incorporate with the liquid. Mix it really good. Get yourself a nice sturdy like spatula or spoon or something. I own a dough whisk. My husband got me a dough whisk and a banneton and a lamb, I think that's how you pronounce it, for Valentine's Day because I was making so much sourdough bread. And they're awesome. I will say, like, the right tools are pretty cool, but you can do this without all those fancy tools. Like before I had a lamb, I just used a knife to score the top. Before I had a dough whisk, I just used a spatula or a spoon. And so I'm using it with like my original beginner's basic tools and not my fancy nice tools, so that if you don't own the fancy tools at home, you can just use your whatever you have at home. So don't worry at all about getting all the super fancy stuff. When you start reading about sourdough, you're like, oh my gosh, it has all the fancy things. How am I gonna do this? I don't own one of those. Just instead of a banneton, you can use a regular bowl with a tea towel. Instead of a dough whisk, you just use just about anything to stir it. So you want to get that dough mixed up. Just keep mixing until it's dough-like, or mostly just incorporated. So you are going to let it rest for an hour. This recipe calls that step autolyzing, but I think it's sort of like a pseudo autolyzing because I think the autolyzing step is actually done without the salt yet. But like I said, whenever I add the salt later, in a later step, I always forget it. You better err on the side of just add a little salt early, especially if it's not iodized. You're fine, probably. Okay, so I'm going to scrape off any of the flour from the sides of the bowl to get it to go into the dough. I wonder if there's a way I can show you. I'm just mixing dough. It's not that fancy. Let's see. Yeah, there you go. Oh, close for me. Oops, I'm going to see it better. Just keep mixing. Just keep mixing. Just scraped off all the stuff from the sides. Get it all incorporated. Then what you're going to do is just cover it and let it sit for an hour. So cover it with either saran wrap, like cling film, or a dampened and wrung out tea towel. I use a tea towel. We try to be not plastic free, but less plastic in this household. I think it's impossible to be completely plastic free. But yes, so we try not to use too many of those single-use disposable plastics if we can help it. Okay, so now you're gonna let this sit for an hour, let it rest so the dough kind of relaxes a bit, and I'll see you in about an hour for the next step. So go ahead and cover yours. Alrighty, catch you later.